The Razer Wolverine V2 Pro has one feature that I wish all pad controllers had. We're going to talk about it right now. Hello and welcome to another NihongoGamer video. Now the first thing you should know about this controller is that it's very exciting for fighting games because it has this. A clicky D-pad, and that was a big deal when the previous controller came out, the Razer Raion. This controller came out something like 4 years ago. I made a video on my channel here, but I had issues with the D-pad because you could push down right in the middle and actuate all directions at the same time, which doesn't really offer you any specific benefit. It just felt like a flaw. Fast forward a few years and it looks like Razer has fixed those problems. However, you should know that this was not designed for fighting gamers. Now, before I go into detail about what makes the Wolverine V2 Pro better than the Raion, but maybe something you still need to think about carefully before you purchase, is that this was sent to me by Razer for the purposes of making this video, but they didn't ask me to say anything specific about it, and all opinions are my own. So I'm going to go through all the features of this controller that make it quite exciting, but I want to show you right now the feature that I'm most excited about on this controller, these buttons right here. On this, the Wolverine V2 Pro, you actually have an extra shoulder button here, R1, R2, and I believe this is M2. And the reason this is so exciting is that instead of normally just using your index fingers to press these shoulder buttons, you now also have an extra button that you can press with the tip of your finger, and this is actually a really big deal. There are situations where you're going to accidentally press back buttons all the time. You want to have a good grip on the controller. So we're going to talk about all that and more, but let's go through the features one by one. First of all, I want you to have a look at this controller. It's obviously designed to be a normal pro controller with the focus being on the analog sticks. The reason you know this is because the analog stick on the left is in the prime position, and actually if you want to use the D-pad you have to move it down to the Xbox position. I realize that there are many players who do actually like this position, but I really find it difficult to use because at this angle, you're using this part of the thumb to press left, but you're using a really good part of the thumb to press right. I personally think that you have the advantage when you're on the left, on the first player side over here, but when you go over to the second player side, a lot of commands just become difficult. While we're talking about the analog sticks, I should say that they work perfectly fine. They've got a very wide range of motion, and another thing that they do is you can actually remove these caps. I think it comes with longer caps as well, but that's not really the focus of this review. The next thing we should talk about is the D-pad. The reason this is so exciting, like I mentioned before, is that it is a clicky D-pad. And more importantly, unlike the Razer Raion, where you could actually push down right in the middle of the whole pad, and then you'd actually have to lift up on the pad so that you could re-input more directions, that's not how most D-pads work, and there's a reason why. Because that's basically a flaw. On the Razer Wolverine V2, there is a pivot in the middle, which means that no matter how hard you push on this, you could still just rock back and forward to get new directions to come in. You do have a really nice clicky D-pad, and I can confirm that it does feel really nice to use because you feel every single click. Even if you've got the sound off, you have a very tactile, haptic feedback that lets you know that you have done forward, down, down, forward. You've done all the motions required for this move. Even if you're using modern controls, it helps to know that you felt like you pressed the button twice to do your dashes, or you just pressed it a single time, and the button, you have that confirmation from your controller that you've actually done the correct inputs. And this will save you a huge amount of time when you're practicing, because you're like, what am I doing wrong? On a normal D-pad, you often don't know what you've actually done wrong. But on this D-pad, just well, I didn't hear all 3 clicks. I know that I didn't actually input the direction correctly. So, love the D-pad on here. But there are 2 things that I'm not super keen on with this D-pad, and one of them is the fact that you get accidental jump inputs. Maybe the fact that it's a circular D-pad, but when you press on the cardinal directions, so up, down, left, and right, it's still very easy to push a little bit too hard up or push a little bit too hard down on here. You're going left, right, left, right, left, right, and sometimes I would go forward, forward, and instead of getting forward, forward, I would just get an up jump like this. This happens especially so when you're on the right side, which brings me to point number 2, which is that I'm not a big fan of the Xbox layouts. It feels really weird to dash left because you use this part of the thumb. It just feels really bizarre to do it. If you want to get a good forward input on the 2-player side, you actually have to kind of lift your thumb off and just tap on it with the tip of your thumb. Once you've moved off the center of the D-pad, you're no longer in a position to quickly go over here and do your other inputs. It really is a shame though, because I actually love everything else about this D-pad. In fact, I was kind of under NDA for a couple of years. I wasn't really allowed to say anything about it, but the NDA has lifted. I'm allowed to talk about it now. I was consulted about improving this D-pad. So when the Raion actually came out and I made that video, they sent me a prototype of the version that they fixed. Now, they never actually released the fixed version of the Raion. I think they quietly changed the design and they didn't let anyone know that there was a new version. This improved D-pad for the Raion basically just filtered through to other controllers. And I think there might actually be other Razer controllers that also feature this D-pad. And the reason I mention that is because the Raion, which was for PS4, it cost $99. The Wolverine V2 Pro costs $249. Really, what I would have liked is this new and improved D-pad, but in the PlayStation layout. So basically, I wanted a sequel to the Raion, but it looks like they never did that. The good news, though, is that they did take my advice and they put a pivot in the D-pad, and so we've got the D-pad we wanted, but now it's in the wrong position. However, there is one more catastrophic thing that I have to announce. The crippling issue with it now is that you miss the down input. Now, what does that mean? You might want to cancel into a Tatsumaki. So, for example, you do down, medium, kick, and then you cancel into a Tatsumaki. If you're walking forward and you do it, then you're going to end up pressing down forward. The fastest way to get the down, medium, kick is not to go neutral and then down to kick. You'll just be pressing forward and then you'll press down, forward, kick. This is something you would do on any other controller, on an arcade stick, on a leverless controller, or on a normal D-pad. When I tried to do this on the Wolverine V2 Pro, watch what happens. Down, medium, kick, nothing comes out. And why is that? If you look at my inputs here, you can see I went from down, forward, kick, to down, back, to back, kick. Notice what's missing. There's no down input. And what happens on the Wolverine is that when I go from down, forward, to down, back, there's just no down input. The only way to do it is to go down, forward, and then let go, and then just do a separate Tatsumaki, and you just don't have time to be doing that in a combo. Now, talking about the rest of the controller, we've got the face buttons, we've got the touchpad, we've got the share button, the options button, the PlayStation button. If I press this dot button and I press various directions, it will switch profiles, so now I'm in the yellow profile. If I press again, I'm in the blue profile. So I've programmed M2 over here to be the L3 button. It is so much easier in Street Fighter 6 to do drive rush if you've got a shortcut button on here on the right side. Now, on other Pro controllers, I have set it up to use the back button. Like, this is quite a stiff button. When I set it to the back button, I missed it all the time. So that brings us nicely over to these buttons that we're talking about here, these shoulder buttons. And again, the reason that they're so exciting is that I can just use my index finger for 3 different things instead of just 2 different things. On a pad controller, because you gripped the controller like this, you really only have your index fingers and your thumbs as appendages to freely press the button. These fingers back here, personally, I think they're best saved for holding the controller in place. But when I use this controller, I actually don't use the back buttons on the left. I leave my hand like this, and I do use the back buttons on the right. And then I use M2 as my parry button. And obviously, if you press forward, forward, and parry, you get your drive rush. And then I just use my ring finger down here to tap this button, which I use as a shortcut for 2 kicks. Then I can just go straight into his fire Shoryuken. But this brings me to one of the issues with the Wolverine V2 Pro in terms of tournament play. Unfortunately, I cannot find a way to unmap this button, which means that I have 2 physical buttons set to the same function. And as far as I'm aware, according to tournament rules, that's not allowed. Now, on other Pro controllers, you are able to unmap the normal buttons, but on the Wolverine V2 Pro, you have to use the iOS or Android app in order to program it. You can't actually do it on the controller without the app. And you can't even do it. I don't even think there's PC software. You have to use a smartphone in order to do it. So that's another kind of tricky point, which makes this controller a little bit difficult to use. But the main issue is that if I can't unmap the regular controls, then I can't tournament legally move them to these extra buttons, like the M2 buttons or the back buttons. So right off the bat, even if this is the controller you like to use at home, if you're not going to be allowed to use it in a tournament anyway, then you're in serious trouble. Now, on the back of the controller, we've got a large number of things that I want to show you. First of all, these paddles they have full range of motion, but if you lock them in place, they become these clicky button triggers. So they've only got like 3 or 4 millimeters of travel, but if you unlock them, you've got the full like 2 centimeters. That's totally personal preference. I don't think that's going to affect whether you win the match or not. The next interesting thing here is the fact that you've got the wireless or wired mode. You can switch this here. If I go into wired mode, it will disconnect my controller. If I go back into wireless mode, just to log myself back in, I'll just hold down the PS button for 3 to 4 seconds. And as you can see, I'm back in. And then next, you've also got the switch that changes between PS5 mode and PC mode. And it's officially licensed, so you don't need to worry about compatibility. Anyway, moving on to the rest of the back buttons, they say M3, M4, M5, and M6, and that's because M1 and M2 are up here. So you've got 4 back buttons, and I have to admit, I love these back buttons. Now, I found that for Drive Rush, I found it not very useful because maybe I just couldn't get used to it. But I've been playing on this thing for like months now, and I just found it really difficult to press a back button and press the forward direction at the same time. But when it was on the shoulder button, I just found that like I never had much of an issue with it. But if you're setting the back buttons for things like drive impact, things that you don't really need to time at the exact same moment as you're pressing a direction, then it's probably totally fine. So essentially, I'm going to leave you there because this is kind of a running story with many Razer products that come in, and it's that they kind of destroy the competition in so many aspects. For example, when the Raion came out, I was just like, this is so simple and yet so great. This is perfect. It's got nice, fast, clicky buttons, got these mechanical key switch buttons. It's got a really nice feel, like they molded these grips perfectly. It feels good. If you don't mind the Xbox layout, then basically the layout is also fine. It's now got a clicky D-pad. Again, personally, I would prefer to have the PlayStation layout, but it's got the clicky D-pad and it's got a pivot on the inside. So they fixed the main problem. Unfortunately, it now has a new issue that no one could see, which is the fact that it just skips neutral down. And this is a serious, serious issue and frustrating for me. If they could make a version of this controller which was less expensive, had those 3 features, and if they fixed the issue with the skipping of the neutral down input, I can think of numerous ways. It's just so frustrating because this is how I've titled almost every other Razer video. Apart from the Kitsune, almost every other Razer video I've ever made has had the same title. So much right, one thing less so. And unfortunately, that title is also perfect for this. So much right. I love almost everything about this, to the point that I almost want to sacrifice screwing up combos just so that I can use this controller. But there is one main thing that cripples it. It's the fact that it skips the neutral down position. And the other thing that I'm not super keen on is the Xbox layout. But if I really forced myself, I might be able to get used to that. But again, really, it should be up here. You know, like on the Raion. It's so frustrating because I want to love it. I want to love it. But I hope this video has been useful for you. You may find that any of the issues that I mentioned today make no difference to you. In fact, a lot of people who watched my Raion video, they said they don't really mind that there's no pivot on the inside and they could find a way to get around it. So if that's you, totally fine. But it's important to know all of the things about this controller because, for example, even if you want to use these back buttons or these extra M1 and M2 buttons, it's just difficult to find a way to use them in a way that makes it actually tournament legal. I assume that can be done in a firmware update. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to the channel. I have plenty of other videos. If you're absolutely set on using a pad controller for fighting games, you don't want to miss out on this video right here. I've been NihongoGamer. That's all I've got time for today. I'll see you real soon.